Today we're continuing our series on the book of James, putting faith into practice. This is the theme of the book as James explains to us what a life of faith ought to look like. Now, as we're going through this series, we're noticing some highlights from the book as we seek to learn what a life of faith is going to look like. In this fourth lesson, we're going to be talking about being justified by works. This is a somewhat misunderstood topic in the religious world, even though, as we're going to see, what James has to say is pretty straightforward. The problem comes when people assume that James was contradicting what Paul wrote about when he talked about being justified by faith. Yet, as we're going to see here, there is no contradiction between them, but there is harmony if we understand what these passages are teaching. Let's look at James chapter 2, verses 21 through 24. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar? You see that faith was working with his works, and as a result of the works, faith was perfected. And the scripture was fulfilled which says, "And Abraham believed God, and was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God." You see that a man is justified by works, and not by faith alone. How could James say that we are justified by works and not by faith alone? Well, the reason why this is confusing for some people, and some people hear this and it sounds odd to them, is because they've been conditioned to think that we are justified by faith alone. Therefore, when they read passages like Romans chapter 5 and verse 1 that say that we are justified by faith, they automatically in their mind think of being justified by faith alone. However, the only time that phrase, faith alone, is used in the Bible is right here in James chapter 2 and verse 24, where James says we are not justified by faith alone. He used the example of Abraham, the same example that Paul used when he wrote about being justified by faith in Romans chapters 4 and 5. So this passage in James provides inspired commentary into what Paul was writing about, as they were explaining the same principle. We are justified by faith, but not by faith alone. Faith and works have to go together, like was the case with the faith of Abraham that led him to offer his son to the Lord. In the same way, our faith has to be an active faith. We must do the will of God. And if we are not being obedient to the Lord, then our faith is a dead faith. That's what James would say in verse 26 of this chapter. For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. If we want to stand justified before God, we must believe in Him, but we must also be doing His will. We need to have an obedient faith if we want to be pleasing to the Lord.